Welcome to week 39. Today we'll be starting with, you guessed it, our 16th note rhythm warm-up. We'll be continuing our dive into gold standard scales with A flat major, A flat harmonic minor, D flat major, and D flat harmonic minor. And then we'll be taking our second look into ragtime, the 2-quarter rag that I created for us today. And this is the B section, right? So last week we had the 1-quarter rag, and that was 1/4 of a ragtime piece. So today is the 2nd quarter. We'll be taking a look at that after we move over to the drum and get rhythmically warmed up. Let's get started with line 1. The metronome will be set at 40 BPM, and let's have that represent the upbeats today. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Top line. 1 and 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent. Moving on to line 3, we'll scooch our metronome up to 45, and let's have this represent all of the E's today. Line 2, E's at 45. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Switch your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Top line hands together. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. For line 3, we're going to move our metronome to 25 BPM, which means the metronome isn't on halftime, and we are speeding up to 50 BPM. And now the clicks of the metronome will represent the 1st and the 3rd E's. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Top line. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Last but not least, we have line 4 today. We'll speed our metronome up to 30, which means we will be going at 60. And now the metronome will represent the second and the fourth E. Let's give it a try. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Switch hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Taking a look at the 2/4 rag, I want to take a similar approach that we did to the 1/4 rag, which is looking at this in 3 different ways. First, we're going to talk about the larger structure, the form, right? Then we're going to take a micro look at the harmonies. And then we'll continue talking about some of the ragtime techniques that are being used here and how you might go about thinking of them in a way that makes it more accessible and easy for you. Structurally speaking, every section of a ragtime piece is 16 measures long, and each of those sections is sort of divided up into 2 8-bar phrases. Just like the last time, it's very similar, where our first phrase, our first line of our first phrase and our first line of our second phrase are both going to be very similar, whereas the second line of the first phrase is going to be different from the second line of the second phrase. Alrighty, so that's about it with this. Of course, it's repeated because I like to say perhaps the reason why we do so many repeats in ragtime is because it can be difficult, and the composers wanted to give you 2 chances to try everything, right? So anyways, let's go ahead and dive into the harmonies of this piece. The B section for our ragtime piece is actually going to start on the 5/7, and that's pretty common if you think about it, because the B section is in the very middle of the piece, and so we don't want it to sound like we're just starting out, and we don't want to sound too much like we're finishing, but we do want to sound like we're in the middle of something. So if you were to just play the 2/4 rag without the context of the 1/4 rag, you'd be like, that piece sounds kind of like it started in the middle of something, and that's because it did start in the middle of something. So we're actually going to reverse things here, and we're going to be going back and forth between the 5/7 and, you guessed it, the 1, because there's nothing wrong with this simple, elegant progression of the 5/7 and the 1, and we're going to do that a couple of times, because as you remember also, ragtime, it just follows the simple rules of harmony, and then every now it throws in a surprise, like right here. So we get to our 1 chord, which is played by A flat, right? A flat is in the role of the 1 right now. However, we're about to give A flat a disguise so that we'll be playing a new role, and that disguise is the G flat. So what we have now is an A flat 7, and what that is the 5 of the 4, which means we must be going to the 4, right? And so that is a little bit of spice, not too crazy, just a little secondary dominant, but we bring ourselves to our D flat chord, which is our 4. Then, of course, here's my spice, right? My name is Anthony, and I use the 4, the minor 4, way too much, but I just love that sound. So we have D flat minor, which in this case is our minor 4, like that, right? And then we're going to have an interesting little thing here where we go from a C chord, which is pretty much a C7, I would say, to an F7, to a B flat, E flat, A flat. It's kind of like, you know, the B section of a ragtime piece is a meandering section. It meanders. You usually see a lot of scales here, and you may notice that a lot of the scale work in this section is very similar to maybe more modern styles of jazz like bebop, or more Baroque styles like Bach's inventions and whatnot. And that's because the age-old practice of using scales and then throwing in chromaticism has been done forever, and that's what's happening here. So we've been meandering, and then suddenly we find ourselves needing to catch up, right? And so the harmonies increase in number so that we can turn ourselves back around and get back to our original section. So we don't need to look at these 4 measures because they're going to be exactly like these 4 measures. And so let's look at this contrasting section down here and see what happens. Now we're still going to be going to the 4, all right? So that's still the plan, but we're going to do it a little bit differently in this section, all right? And so what we're going to do is really the first thing I said is I want to do this ragtime idea that you see there in the right hand. I want to do it once with D flat, and then I want to do it again with A flat. But I want to spice it up a little bit. What is something that you can put between any 2 chords? There's only 3 of them, and if you find the right one, it will sound good. A diminished chord, right? So in between each of those, we use a D diminished. And the reason for that is that the D diminished, or if you want to call it F, A flat, or V, whatever, that shape has an A flat in it. Therefore, D flat has an A flat in it, D diminished has an A flat in it, A flat has an A flat in it, and D diminished has an A flat in it. So that A flat, which is our 1, is linking all of these sounds together, and that's one way you can figure out which diminished chord is right for you. Does it have a common tone to the other chords that you are linking together? That's what happened here, okay? Now, for the very end of this piece, you're gonna see something really familiar. We go to our E flat 7, right, our 5, and then we go up a half step, and hey, don't you remember that we did this in the A section? And so that's something that's really common, is every now and then to hint back at the A section, at the very end of the B section. It kind of just ties everything together real nicely in a composition. And the other advantage to using the ending of the A section is that in the form of ragtime, you play 2 A sections, then you play 2 B sections. But before you go to the C section, you actually play the A section one more time. And so whenever we do that, this second ending will lead us perfectly back into the very first section, the A section, okay? So wrapping up these last harmonies down here, we're familiar with these because we saw them in the 1/4 rag, but of course we have our E flat 7, which obviously is our 5/7, and then our A flat. And then that will either take us back to the top of the tune, or it will take us back to the top of the A section, and those are the harmonies of the 2/4 rag. Now the last thing that I want to talk about today are some of the ragtime isms that are going on here, okay? I think maybe you might have noticed after you tried the 1/4 rag that, hey, that left hand sure does move around a lot. And you know, this is a very popular pattern. It's not new to ragtime, right? Things like this have been done in classical music. Sometimes in polkas, it's called the pa, right? Where you're alternating between bass, chord, right? And it can be a little bit tricky at first. The more you practice your chords and you're familiar with these chord shapes, the easier your hand will be able to access them. And it is, you know, in music, there is definitely something about having to pay your dues, having to put in the time. And the more you put in the time with this style of left hand, the more it will become natural for you. It's also a great investment because learning the ragtime style of the left hand will be the gateway to a very cool style of jazz called stride. Okay, now stride is sort of like when your hand is moving back and forth, just like in ragtime. Once we get into jazz in the 1920s after ragtime, the left hand really evolves and develops some new, very cool and slick techniques. But it really helped to play the ragtime left hand for a while before trying to get into stride, because if you can get your ragtime chops up, it makes stride that more accessible. All right, so that's the stride, that's the left hand. And then let's talk about the right hand, okay? As I mentioned before, the B section in a ragtime piece tends to meander. And oh boy, look at all of this scale work. It's just scale after scale after scale with a lot of chromaticism in there, okay? Everything was written to fall under the fingers nicely, okay? So don't overcomplicate any of this. It's just easily playing up and down scales. We have another one of those sections here where we actually do have some of what we call the anchor tones, right? We have these anchor tones in here, and the chord, the outside notes are actually just rotating around those chords. So instead of thinking like you have to go like this on each one of those, it's more like you lock down on the anchor tones and you rotate around the anchor tones. I also want to point out that this and this are exactly the same thing, okay? So don't try to teach yourself the same thing twice. We always want to be on the lookout for those kinds of similarities, all right? So without further ado, let's go ahead and give this a listen on the piano. If you enjoyed today's lesson, you can find these show notes, including today's music and much more, on my website at Piano Dojo, or you can support us by simply subscribing and sharing this channel with anybody who's looking for answers about the piano. Until next time, happy practicing.